All right, everyone. So most people feel like they have to listen to their execs, and I get it. They're your boss, or your boss's boss, or your boss's boss's boss. But I'm here to tell you otherwise. They don't have all the answers, and you're not expected to execute on every single idea that they have. But you do need to learn how to manage up. Learning to manage up is a fundamental skill to not only survive, but thrive in corporate, and it is a learned skill. Many people never actually realize it, and others kind of just figure it out along the way. But unless you're actually taught it, it can take you years. So today, I'm going to fast track that for you and teach you some key lessons that you need to know in order to manage your senior leaders. And that's from someone who has both managed up herself, but also been managed. Now, for those who don't know me, my name is Ali. I am an enterprise leader at a company called Flutter. And throughout my 15 to 20 years in corporate, I've had a ton of experience that has taught me how to manage up. And that includes being responsible for a $1 billion budget. I've sat on leadership teams of businesses, and I've also been responsible for major transformation programs in different businesses. So I've had plenty of experience in both managing up, but also being managed myself. Now, I want to take you through a recent story that a mentee shared with me. And she basically jumped on a call and she was just like, "Oh, I'm so deflated. I just came from a meeting where we were sharing with our leadership team an update on the product that we're about to launch. And all they asked was, can you add features XYZ? I just feel so frustrated because we're not going to be able to do it. We don't have the resource and we don't have the time." This frustration happens to people all the time, and as a default, they feel that they need to learn to manage up and manage expectations. But here's the thing, managing up isn't actually just about managing expectations. It's actually about demonstrating strategic thinking. You're learning to speak in a language that execs hear. Basically, what you're doing is trying to identify what they care about and speaking about those things first. And they're always thinking about things like, what's the impact of the work, the outcome to the customers, what's the risk that we need to manage, how engaged is the team, is there going to be impact to adjacent teams that I need to think about based on this work? Are there competitive pressures that we need to think about? And what's the cost that we need to manage? Like there's loads of things that are going on in their mind. And so learning to manage up is actually having the business acumen to think about all of these things and communicate that message to your stakeholder before they ask you the question. So we're going to go through 4 lessons that will help upskill you in managing up and practicing that strategic thinking. Now, the first lesson is don't mistake their questions as must-do directions. People do this all the time. They think that just because they were asked something, they have to do it, or that that's the right way to go about things. But actually, you have to remember, like, the exec's role is to drive progress of a business. So they're going to ask you questions that help drive progress. And that's why they're thinking about things like, can we get this to market faster? Is there a more cost-effective way to do this? Should we be considering different channels? If you're presenting like a marketing program to them or a marketing plan to them, they might be saying to you, like, should we consider different channels? Or can we add ABC features? But these are questions to help drive progress. They're not necessarily questions saying, I need you to do this. They're just there to encourage your thinking. So just remember, execs and senior leaders are responsible for driving performance of a business. So the questions that they're going to ask you, they're going to be the types of questions that drive progress, that encourage innovative thinking. Like they're just trying to get you to think outside the box and to see if there was anything that you maybe haven't considered. They also want to pressure test the plan, and they're also wanting to encourage you to challenge the status quo and encourage you to not do things just because they're based on legacy. But the questions aren't necessarily directions. And the other thing that's important to remember is when you receive feedback or challenge, it's not criticism. And as I said, it's not direction. It is challenge and questions to help create an environment where you can be more innovative in your thinking. Lesson number 2, when it comes to managing up, is to squash expectations before they grow. So basically, you want to build this skill of proactive communication and really building the skill of answering a question before you get asked it. And really, what you want to do is you want to start building this skill of anticipation. You want to anticipate the questions that they're going to ask you time and time again. So basically, before you compile any presentation, I recommend that you just sit down for 10 minutes and ask yourself, What do they care about? What are the questions that they're going to ask? Or what are the questions that they always ask me? How can I cover them off before they ask them? Like what points can what do I need to answer so that they don't have to ask those questions? And when can I answer them? And this is something that it takes practice, and it actually just takes reps of being in the room. But you need to have this sort of overt habit that you're building of always noticing what questions they're asking you and noticing what things they care about and trying to cover them off before you actually get asked them. So I'll give you an example. I used to present promotional plans and proposals and different promotional plans to my C suite member at the time. And it was me and my team, and there were always like obvious questions that he would ask that we knew were coming, right? So how much is it going to cost? What did competitors do last year? What did customers say? And they were the bread and butter, if you will. Like they were the questions that we knew were always going to be asked. And then he would ask ones on top of that I just hadn't thought of, particularly for my first and second proposal. Things like, what's our media support plan going to be? Have you engaged all teams? And he'd ask about certain teams to see had we actually spoken to them. And sometimes we'd be like, no, but we'll touch base with them this week. What we did though, we noticed what were the questions that he kept asking over time. And then we made sure that we built that into the proposal and did so in a very, very clear way so that he didn't have to ask those questions next time. So an example on this, like, have you engaged all the teams? We created like a scorecard slide that showed like all the teams that we knew would be impacted by this. And we basically had ticks next to all of them to say, yes, like we've engaged with all these stakeholders and they're comfortable with this plan. So you need to build this skill of anticipation. And then ideally, what you do, once you've thought through all the questions that you're going to be asked and your answers to them, include that information in a summary up front. So the intro to your presentation, like cover it off in a very concise way, and then make sure that it's covered off in the detail within. All right, the third lesson when you're managing up is that you don't have to respond in the moment. And this is really important to remember, particularly when you're in presentations to senior leaders or execs. You don't have to have an answer in that moment, and it is really okay to say, do you know what, let me look into it, we're going to get back to you. So here is something that you can say, like, that requires further thinking and analysis. Let me come back to you with a response. That is fine to say. Many people feel like they have to have a response in the moment, and they stress or they react or they say something that might be too quick. It's so fine to say, do you know what, I don't have all the answers to that now. Let me come back to you. But what's important is that you make them feel heard and you make them feel acknowledged. So when you're in the room, acknowledge the question and acknowledge that it's heard. Make sure you capture it immediately and send it in writing immediately, and make sure you follow up in a timely manner. So in terms of acknowledging the question, like, as I said, you don't have to have an answer for it straight away, but make sure they feel heard in the moment. So make sure you're saying something like, okay, I hear you on that. And yes, I can see how perhaps we might be able to reduce timelines, but I really need to look into it before I can commit to anything. Let me come back to you. Then immediately after the meeting, like, don't wait till the next day, do it that day, capture the question in email and let the person know when you will come back with a response. It might be 24 hours, it might be 48 hours, it might be a week, but give them a timeline. And then follow up and respond based on that timeline you set. And ideally it is, between 48 hours and 1 week. You don't want to let these things drag on, but give them your response to their question. And in that response, make sure that you're giving them like a clear rationale and a clear explanation as to how you got to the solution that you did. And then lesson 4 in terms of managing up is to show options and considerations whenever you're making a recommendation. So what I mean by this is it's just as important to show what you're recommending and what you're proposing as it is to show what you're saying no to. And again, what that does is it demonstrates strategic thinking. So whether it's in the initial presentation or whether it's in that follow-up response to a question that you got in that presentation, always show options. As I said, you want to show what you said no to just as much as what you're recommending, because it does showcase strategic thinking. It shows that you are starting wide and then going small. And it also shows that you are considering things from different angles. So let me give you some examples of how you might do this. So here's like a really simple one, right? And I always recommend using tables because they're not necessarily a visual, but they're a visual tool that helps structure information, and it just helps people understand your point a lot easier. So an example could be you show them like multiple options that you have that you're considering, and you just highlight the pros and cons to each of them, but you make it concise, right? Like don't add loads and loads of words, but just have a concise summary of what are the pros and cons per option. Another version is you could do like a RAG based, so red, amber, green based matrix assessment across the different levers that you know you need to consider before you make a recommendation. So here's your options up top. And then the levers in this instance could be like the cost, it could be customer appeal, it could be the level of differentiation that initiative, whether it's like a product launch or whether it's a campaign, will give you, and the effort required in order to get it to market. And so again, you're showcasing strategic thinking because you're showing, I'm not just doing this answer, I'm not just doing this version or doing this option because it's the only one we thought of. We've actually gone wide. We've thought of multiple different things. We've considered it through different angles, and here's our recommendation. And so, as I said, you would do this in both your initial presentations, but also if you've been asked a question as a follow-up. So can we get this done faster, or are there more products and features that we can add? You can show them your responses based on multiple options. So if you got a question that was like, can you get this done faster? So say you're a product manager and it's something about getting a new product to market and can you get this done faster? You'd give them options, right? Where it's like, okay, option A is no, like we go at the same speed that we are now and we're delivering XYZ to the customer. Option B is yes, we can get there faster. However, we need incremental investment to get these teams on board. And option C might be, yes, we can go faster, but we're actually going to have to reduce scope and we can get it to market faster, but we're not going to have these features. So again, you're showing multiple options. You're showing how you have considered all of those different options, and then you put your recommendation forward. So those are just a few lessons on how to manage up. So just to summarize, don't mistake their questions as must-do directions. Like your exec isn't there. They're not trying to prove you wrong. They're not trying to say, hey, you actually need to pivot and do this. I mean, sometimes that does happen, but that is not what they're doing most of the time. Their role is to drive progress in a business, and their role is to ask you questions to challenge your thinking and to make sure that you're thinking broadly and thinking innovatively. The second is squash expectations before they grow. So make sure you're answering the question before it's asked and anticipate the different questions that you're going to be asked. Remember that you don't have to respond in the moment. Like, don't feel that you need to have answers to all of their questions as they're asking them to you in a presentation. You're well within your right to say, do you know what? I take that on board. I need to do some investigation. Let me come back to you. And number 4 is show options and considerations. When you are first making a recommendation or when you're going back based on a follow-up question, give them different options and show them how you've assessed those different options to get to your final recommendation. So that's it for today on managing up. I'm sure that you've learned something that's either shifted a belief or I've given you like a tool or tactic that you can use to manage your senior stakeholders. If you want to learn more and you are an ambitious woman wanting to grow her career, I have created a 7-day mini course over email that captures loads of lessons that I have learned throughout my career so I can help fast track yours. If that's not your thing, then there's also a video version of this mini series, and that video, which is number 1, will be up here.